Hello everybody. So we've got our rain simulator set up back there. And so what we have is 5 different soil covers and soil types to just show you kind of how those different covers affect the runoff and the infiltration that's coming through the soil. So we've got the same soil type, and we have a no-till cover crop soil. So that's been in no-till for 10 years, and it's been cover cropped for the past 5 years. So that should be a really healthy soil. Right now they just harvested the wheat off of it and have a diverse multi-species cover crop coming up already. So that's our first one, and then we have the same soil type, but it's a conventionally tilled soil. So that's corn right now, and we can kind of be able to see the difference in the runoff and the infiltration from that. And then our middle one is actually a rotationally grazed pasture that's been in rotation for 3 years with cattle out there. And then we'll have 2 different, 2 sandy soils, plainfield sand, which is a pretty common soil type down here. So we've got a natural prairie and then just a regular lawn. So we can see the difference in that as well.
It's not an irrigated lawn, but it's just a grass lawn, okay? So we're gonna see what happens when we put rain on these. We're gonna see how much water infiltrates and how much water runs off, okay? So that's
and it's gonna simulate a really heavy rainfall. We're gonna get about 1 inch to 2 inches. And so you'll be able to see it coming right through. The soil's probably already pretty saturated, so we'll see how that affects the
Yeah, so one of the fun facts to tell people is, like, in a typical thunderstorm, a rainfall drop is actually traveling around 20 miles per hour, which is much faster than we typically think. And I've been working with kids a lot lately, and I describe it as being like a bomb. As soon as it hits the soil surface, it has the ability to detach silt and clay particles and move them 2 feet up in the air and as far as 5 feet horizontally. So they're very powerful raindrops. And so what we like to think about and talk about is, where is that rainfall going to impact? Is it going to hit a leaf of a plant, or is it going to directly hit that soil? If it directly hits the soil, it's going to detach those particles, and then when they land back down and are deposited, they're going to form what's called a soil crust. And they're going to fill in the pore space, which is going to reduce infiltration. It's going to prevent oxygen and gas exchange with the soil microbes. So it's a really bad thing. One of the things we don't like to see when we walk in the farm field is crust forming. And so to protect our soils from that occurring, we like to have vegetation throughout as much of the year as possible. Vegetation or residue.
Right, which is why you can see the difference here. There is some greens coming in, but that's just like weeds and whatnot. So there's a lot of bare soil here compared to the cover crops and no-till. It's pretty much all covered. And as this decomposes, it'll just cover that field even more.
So yeah, this stuff, it'll compact with the rain since it's been tilled. Some farmers, I tilled it up to great infiltration. Well, what happens is you don't have any structure, so when that rain hits it, it just pushes down and then it runs off. So we'll see what happens.
Anything you're putting on that soil just goes right with it too. All right, let's do it. Okay, so I flipped this.
Yeah, you can turn it on right now if you want.
So I want to stand back. All right.
So a lot of times with compaction, we think about tillage equipment, and people think it's the weight of the equipment that's destroying and compacting the soil. But it's actually the physical manipulation, the destruction of the soil pore spaces is what causes compaction.
You don't necessarily need to show your ticket.
Yeah, so when you have this residue, it gets this organic matter layer on the top, which is really essential for the soil microbes and living organisms in the soil to feed off of and just kind of create a healthy environment in that soil. And especially like when you have these cover crops, this is peas, and that peas, they're gonna put nitrogen into the soil. So then next year he's gonna plant corn here, which really sucks out the nitrogen, and so he won't have to really put on as much fertilizer because that soil is already naturally nitrogen rich from the cover crops he planted.
So you can already see water sitting on the surface on here.
Yep, water ponding on the surface there.
There's a little on the sand here. And maybe because it's been compacted, and because this sand here doesn't have anything on it. There's a lot more organic matter on that.
Yeah, so soils, we also think about what they're composed of, and it's actually surprising to hear like soils are 45 to 50% pore space, and typically up to like 25% or half of that pore space can be filled with water. The other 50% of the soil is usually a 45% like mineral component, so sand, silt, clay, and then 5% organic matter in a healthy soil. And the cool thing about a healthy soil is if you took a tablespoon of that soil and counted the number of soil organisms in it, it would be more than there's ever been humans on Earth. So I think there's billions of soil organisms in 1 tablespoon of healthy soil. And if you think about that on a bigger scale, in 1 acre, in the top foot of soil, there's around 2,500 to 5,000 pounds of soil organisms in 1 acre. And that's equivalent to like an African elephant. So you think about those organisms require food. I know they have a different metabolism than an elephant would, but they require a lot of inputs to keep them fed. So having things like cover crops, continuous vegetation, you're going to have that continuous root decomposing and adding organic matter into the soil and feeding that biology.
Yeah, and you can start to see now, even with the runoff down here. So this is our conventionally tilled, and look at the color difference here versus this rotationally grazed pasture. That mud's coming through there, and so anything you're putting on the soil is also going to be coming through right into the runoff.
So if the soil isn't tilled, you got better structure. And a thing that holds that soil together, it's like,
Glomalin.
Glomalin, and it's formed by the mycorrhizae of the roots and bacteria. And it's like a glue that holds the soil together. So that's why this one doesn't have that, because you're tilling it up every year, you're breaking all that stuff up every year, killing the organisms.
Yeah, you want to have those aggregates. You have that.
Yeah.
Speaking of aggregates,
So I took a chunk of our healthy soil on the left, and I took a chunk of the unhealthy soil on the right. And you can kind of see the unhealthy soil, a lot of it's falling right out, and this fresh one, there is some falling out, but not as much. Like if I really agitate these, you can see a lot more comes out of this one. So what's holding that soil together is that glomalin and those other exudates from roots. We usually think about structure as like a physical property of the soil, and so it must be formed by physical processes. But really, it's actually has a lot to do with the biology. And that glomalin released by the fungi, and other exudates released from roots like sugars and whatnot. When I work with those kids, I tell them that plants actually do poop. And they usually like that joke.
so we're at about a little over 1.5 inch of rain. So that would be a pretty heavy rainfall. All right, and yeah, you can see there's ponding already right at the top of this soil. There's water right on the top, just sitting there. And so you'll see, do we want to remove this?
Yeah.
No? So the big reveal, so this is the water that infiltrated then. So look at how this soil, which has that crusting because it's, disturbed and bare soil, almost nothing infiltrated. So if you're putting those nutrients and you're putting manure and all of that on this soil surface, it's not even really helping your plants. It's running off just right into a lake, a river, whatever is nearby. Whereas this is our cover crop no-till. All that water infiltrated, which is what you want to see because you want that, those plants to be able to take up that water. So, obviously this is a pretty thin slice of soil, but in a normal ground it would kind of stick in there and it would go laterally, it would go down and kind of be available for all those plants to uptake and use.
Same with the pasture, you got good structure in there, that goes through. Same with the prairie, you got good structure in there with all the roots and that goes through. This one here, not as much went through it, even though it's sand. I think maybe because it's more compacted from, driving over it with the tractor and whatnot.
And it is a little more, not as much cover, because you have the grass, but you're cutting that grass, so there's not as much cover as when you have a natural prairie.
So what you're basically saying is this one, the water's running off.
Right.
That's why it's not collecting, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay.
Because that surface, like Andy and Russ were talking about, it crusts.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it doesn't allow it to infiltrate, and so the plants aren't even able to take up that water.
Yeah, so, if there's a drought, you know, a dry year and the farmers
Like
are
this year.
their corn starts wilting, you know, and if they're conventionally doing it, I mean, even when you get a good rainfall, that corn can't take it up because most of it's running
It's all
off.
coming off.
Right. So if
Compared to
you know, if
this
you
one.
no-till, then you know,
You have that huge water storage down
Right.
there that's kind of living in all those pores, just ready, plant available, you know, water down there.
And I love statistics. So sometimes what we do is we'll put a dime on the soil, and you can look at and see how much runoff or erosion there's been. And if you lost 1 dime worth of soil from an acre, I think that's 5 to 10 tons of soil. So you think about how much water storage you're losing, how much organic matter and nutrients, it's gonna be a lot. I think it's something like 300 gallons of water storage per acre that you're gonna lose from just losing 1 dime of soils.
And that dime is kind of like the tolerable, what people consider the tolerable soil loss. So even the tolerable soil loss is still like an insane amount of soil every year. And you know, that's 1 dime, but then you get 10 years, you've got a stack of dimes that you've now lost from your soil cover.
and Andy mentioned earlier about, you know, how the soil splashes off and stuff. So here you can see up against the, you know, there's
Yeah.
some here, but here it's the most, and then of course these with all the cover, there's nothing.
Right, you don't see anything there.
So we have these things we call the 4 soil health principles. We want to maximize cover. So the best way to do that is with perennial vegetation. We want to minimize disturbance. So we don't want to have things like tillage, high vehicle traffic. We want to maximize diversity. So rotationally grazed pastures are probably the best example of that. Continuously grazed pastures oftentimes will be monocultures of one species because they're just kind of grazing everything they can, whereas these species kind of progress at different rates. So if you're moving the cows on and off, then you're going to have a much more diverse system.
And also with moving those cows, they're also not trampling the same areas every day, so it's not getting compacted, and they aren't pooping in the same areas every day. So you aren't getting these concentrated areas of manure, which, you know, the manure gets spread out much more, which helps the soil nutrients. And reduces the amount of nutrients and other things that are going into the groundwater because it's more dispersed and not all in that one area.
And the last one I didn't mention was we want to maximize continuous roots. And I'm a big grazer. I love grazing because what you can do is you can graze off half of the plant and leave half the plant, and it will still maintain its root system. And we think about the soil organic matter like this is good, this is going to contribute some to the soil organic matter in the actual soil, but actually most of it does come from fine root production and decomposition. So when we want to build our soil organic matter, we want to build roots first. Another thing that's really important about roots is that most of the life in the soil is actually around that root zone. Russ talked about, and I think Tristan talked about too, how there's nitrogen fixing bacteria often associated with legumes. That's like the hot spot where there's the most biological activity. So we're always trying to get people to have continuous roots as long throughout the season as they can. Because if you're just growing corn or soybeans, you're only, getting 3 or 4 months of roots out there, and then the rest of the year it's just...
Right, which is why those cover crops are so important, because you maintain that root system throughout the entire year. There's no point of time where there's no roots. So that's really helpful.
The next thing I think we should do is we're going to flip these trays over and look at the flow through the soil, if you guys want to do that.
Let's do it.
So we can flip them over. So a lot of people, when they think about soil and rainfall and infiltration, they just think about the rain hits the soil and it just infiltrates the whole thing. But actually there's preferential flow. The water, the roots, they want to find the path of least resistance. So it's going to travel down earthworm channels, down root pores, and we should be able to see that if we flip them over.
We have a chart, so we aren't
So check out this is our healthy soil. Look at all these earthworm channels. And that's why we had such fast infiltration in this silty loam soil. You can see water's gonna just shoot through those channels. And you can actually see a worm right here.
And see how those aggregates, like when he breaks it apart, it comes out in clumps. It doesn't like just crumble in his hands.
Yeah, we want our soil to look like cottage cheese. We want really small structural units. We don't want to see platy structure from tillage or other disturbances.
Whereas this, if I take it, it's just like it's mush in my hand. Like it doesn't maintain those clumps like that one does.
Do the grazing one then?
Yeah, flip them. So I think the rain didn't help us out today, but a lot of times what you'll see is in a lot of the compacted soils, you'll see kind of just water infiltrating in certain areas, and it will be really spotty. So you can see good structure in that soil too, some good pore spaces, lots more roots, right, than this one.
So once again, this is kind of like the lawns down here in this area. Maybe not as much. It's really hard. Yeah. Sounds like concrete. So then again, here's our test. It's called the slate test, and this was this one here was, which one was the? I think this one was the good one.
Yeah, that's the good one. Yeah.
And this is the bad one here.
Yeah, a lot of it's settled down.
Yeah, see how it's settled down, but if I shake them a little, this one, it's eroding a little, but they're bigger pieces. This one's like, look at all the fine stuff, okay? And this one is holding up better as far as the two clumps. And this one did have a lot of roots, which typically they don't.
So that's a really easy test that anybody can do. We can just walk into a farm field, but another thing I like to do is just look at the structure. And so this was from a continuously grazed pasture, and this is what I was talking about with clayey structure. And think about how water is going to try to move through this. It's going to want to move horizontally across the plain and won't be able to infiltrate. You can pass this around and just feel how heavy it is.
And so again, just to distinguish, that's a continuously grazed, where the one we have is rotationally.
Yeah,
so the rotationally allows that soil health to maintain, whereas continuous is just kind of always being grazed.
Yeah, I always have a car full of soil.
Compacted too, and you can see too, like if you're, so this was the natural prairie, and this was the lawn. Things are stabbing me. And so this is the infiltration here, and you can see the difference in infiltration between the just lawn, which is more compacted, versus the infiltration of the natural prairie. So if you're watering your lawn fairly often, a lot of that is actually probably just running off right into the lake. It's not even infiltrating. And then also if you do apply fertilizers or anything like that, that's going to run off right into the lake. So it's just something to think about with, these natural prairies really do increase that infiltration and, will uptake more of that water in the soil, so less of it is going to end up in the lake.
Does aerating help?
It does. It does help.
Not that much.
But yeah, I mean, they only go down, like the kind of aeration.
And even if, when you have property right on a lake, and especially with sandy soils, if you get a heavy rain event, there's going to be water right underneath the surface called base flow that's just going to go right off into the lake too. So in those heavy events, it can't all infiltrate all the way down, so it's going to not only run off the surface, it's going to go down a little bit and then continue to go underneath that soil through channels into the lake as well.